Robert Plant has been saying this for years. Almost nobody has been paying attention. He says it in interviews. He said it on CBS Mornings in November 2025. He has been saying versions of it since the 1970s. He says it with what one interviewer described as a reflective gleam in his eye. He says, "I was friends with her, yeah. She used to look after me." She, Janis Joplin, the most famous female rock singer in America in 1969, looking after the 21-year-old from West Bromwich who had just arrived in America with his band and did not yet know what he was going to become. And she showed him something specific. Something technical, something he still uses every time he steps up to a microphone. Almost nobody knows this story. This is that story. 1969, Led Zeppelin's first American tour. Robert Plant was 21 years old. He was from West Bromwich in the West Midlands of England, the son of a civil engineer who had wanted him to become an accountant. He had been singing in bands since he was 17. He had recorded with the Band of Joy. He had been discovered by Jimmy Page and brought into the group that would become Led Zeppelin. Their first album had been released in January 1969. It had gone to number 10 on the Billboard charts. They were touring America for the first time as a headline act. Plant has described that first American tour as overwhelming. The scale of the audiences, the scale of the country, the specific shock of discovering that something you made in a studio in England could fill an arena in America. He was 21 years old. He was pushing his voice to the edge every night. The high notes, the screaming, the full physical commitment of a Led Zeppelin set. He was also discovering that pushing a voice to the edge every night without knowing how to manage it had consequences. And somewhere on that first tour, in one of the backstage rooms that touring musicians share, he met Janis Joplin. She was 26 years old. She had been doing this for 3 years of performing at the level that Plant was just beginning. 3 years of Fillmores and festival stages and arenas, 3 years of giving everything every night, and figuring out, through practice and pain, how to keep giving. She had learned things the hard way. She had learned how to survive the loudest stages. She had learned what the voice could sustain and what it could not. She had developed, across hundreds of performances, the specific practical knowledge of a great singer who has been doing this long enough to understand the mechanics of it. And she looked at Robert Plant, 21, golden-haired, pushing everything to the edge, and she recognized something. She recognized what she had been doing 3 years earlier, before she figured it out. She decided to help. The technique she showed him is almost comically unglamorous. It was not a mystical transfer of rock and roll spirit. It was not the blues wisdom passed down through generations. It was this: how to slightly narrow the mouth and shape the vowels so the sound cuts through the band without needing to scream. A tiny physical adjustment, a specific placement of the voice, the kind of thing that singing teachers spend years trying to explain and that great performers sometimes discover on their own through trial and error, and that Janis Joplin, who had discovered it on her own through trial and error, passed on to a 21-year-old British singer backstage at an American concert. "Let the sound cut through the band," she told him, "without the scream. Narrow the mouth just so. Shape the vowel just so. The power is still there, the edge is still there, but the throat survives." Plant has recalled this in interviews as both a specific technical memory and a broader memory of what she was like. The generosity of it, not a lesson delivered formally, just a working singer quietly helping another working singer figure out how to get through a show. That is what she was like. Read that sentence again. She used to look after me. Not, she taught me something important. Not, she gave me advice about singing. She used to look after me, the language of someone who was cared for. Robert Plant was 21 years old, very far from England, doing something enormous for the first time. And Janis Joplin, who had been 21 and very far from Port Arthur and doing something enormous for the first time, recognized the specific vulnerability of that position and did something about it. She showed him the technique. She looked after him in the backstage rooms where touring musicians spend the hours before and after shows. She was the more experienced person in those rooms, the person who had learned the things he was still learning, and she shared what she knew. He has been talking about this for 55 years. Janis Joplin died on October 4, 1970. Robert Plant was 22 years old. Led Zeppelin was about to become the biggest rock band in the world. Led Zeppelin 2 had gone to number 1. Led Zeppelin 3 was released the same month Janis died. The arc of what they would become, the arenas, the mythology, the albums that would be played for 50 years, was just beginning. Janis Joplin died before she saw any of it. She saw a 21-year-old kid in a backstage room, pushing his voice to the edge, not yet knowing how to manage it. She showed him something practical. She looked after him, and then she was gone, and he went on to become Robert Plant. Here is what Plant has never quite said directly, but what is implicit in everything he has said about her. The voice that made Led Zeppelin what it was, the instrument that produced Whole Lotta Love and Stairway to Heaven and Rock and Roll and Babe I'm Gonna Leave You, was shaped, in part, by a conversation in a backstage room with Janis Joplin in 1969. Not entirely, not only. Led Zeppelin would have been what it was because of Page and Jones and Bonham and Plant himself. Plant's voice is his own, the product of his own instrument and his own development, but the specific technique that let him sustain that voice through 50 years of performing, that let him sing Stairway to Heaven in 1971 and again in 2025 at 77 years old. Part of that traces back to what she showed him. She used to look after me. He steps to a microphone. He narrows the mouth just so. He shapes the vowel just so. The sound cuts through the band. The throat survives. She is there in that adjustment. Every time. November 2025. Robert Plant is 77 years old. He is still performing with his band Saving Grace. He appeared on CBS Mornings to discuss his music and his memories. The interviewer asked about Janis Joplin. A reflective gleam in his eye, the interviewer noted. The specific warmth and loss of someone speaking about the dead. I was friends with her, yeah? She used to look after me. That was all he needed to say. 55 years. He carries it still. Here is what this story asks you. Who looked after you when you were just starting out? Not with grand gestures, with the specific, practical, unglamorous generosity of someone sharing what they know because you are going to need it and they happen to have it. Janis Joplin was 26 years old in 1969. She had 3 years of hard-won knowledge about how to survive the stages she was performing on. Robert Plant was 21 and pushing his voice to the edge without knowing how to manage it. She showed him something small. She looked after him in the backstage rooms. He became Robert Plant. He sang Stairway to Heaven. He filled arenas for 50 years. He appeared on CBS Mornings in 2025 at 77 years old and said her name with a reflective gleam in his eye. She did not live to see any of it. She was gone at 27, but every time he narrows his mouth and shapes the vowel and the sound cuts through the band without the scream, she is there. She used to look after him. She still does. Subscribe. The next story goes somewhere nobody has taken you before. It was not for Pearl. It was not for Clive Davis or Paul Rothchild or the Full Tilt Boogie Band. It was a birthday greeting for John Lennon. On October 1, 1970, in the recording studio where she had been making Pearl for several months, Janis Joplin stepped up to a microphone one final time in her life, not for an album, not for a professional purpose, and recorded herself singing Happy Trails, the old Dale Evans cowboy song. From Roy Rogers and Dale Evans and the Saturday morning westerns of the 1940s and 1950s, Happy Trails to You, Until We Meet Again. She recorded it for John Lennon's 30th birthday, coming on October 9. She mailed the tape. 3 days later, October 4th, 1970, Janis Joplin died in room 105 of the Landmark Motor Hotel in Los Angeles. She was 27 years old. The tape was already in the mail. John Lennon received it after she was gone. Almost nobody knows this story. The tape was not released until 1993 on the Janis box set. It is titled Happy Birthday, John, Happy Trails. Anyone can hear it today. Almost nobody knows it exists. This is that story. They had never met. There is no documented meeting between Janis Joplin and John Lennon, no party where both were present, no festival backstage, no studio corridor. Two of the most important voices of their generation, aware of each other the way everyone in 1970 was aware of everyone, through music, through magazines, through the specific knowledge that the world was full of people doing extraordinary things, but never in the same room. And yet, she knew his birthday, she thought of him. She took time out of the final recording sessions of her life to make something that had nothing to do with her career, nothing to do with her album, nothing to do with anything except a birthday and a song, and the simple gesture of sending warmth to someone she had never met. That is who she was, underneath the stage version, underneath the feather boa and the southern comfort and the banshee wail. A person who thought of someone else's birthday and did something about it. October 1970. The world both of them occupied simultaneously. John Lennon was living at Tittenhurst Park, his estate in Ascot, England, with Yoko Ono. The Beatles had officially dissolved in April. He had released Instant Karma in January. He was working on the Imagine album. For the first time in nearly a decade, he was figuring out what it meant to be John Lennon without being a Beatle. Janis Joplin was at Sunset Sound in Los Angeles. Pearl was almost finished. The Full Tilt Boogie Band was the best musical situation she had ever been in. The album was extraordinary, she knew it. Everything pointed forward, and on October 1, she stepped to a microphone and sang Happy Trails. The song itself, an ending song, a farewell. Happy trails to you, until we meet again. Dale Evans wrote it for a television show, for the closing credits, for the moment when Roy Rogers and Trigger rode off into the sunset and the episode was over. Janis sang it as a birthday greeting, as a cheerful cowboy send-off, as the musical equivalent of a birthday card from a friend who thought of you. She did not know what the words meant in context. She did not know she had 3 days. Read that sentence again. She did not know she had 3 days. On October 3rd, she recorded Happy Trails and mailed it to John Lennon. On October 4th, she was gone. The package was traveling. The tape was inside. Her voice was inside the tape. Happy trails to you, until we meet again. She was already gone when the package arrived. John Lennon received it around his birthday, October 9. He was 30 years old. The most famous musician in the world, turning 30, receiving a birthday tape from a woman who had died 5 days before he heard it. He pressed play. Her voice came out of the tape. Alive, warm, cheerful, the voice of someone who was thinking about you on your birthday, someone who wanted to make you smile, someone who had no idea she was about to die. Happy trails to you, until we meet again. He heard it knowing she was already gone. John Lennon told Dick Cavett about receiving it in an interview in that specific way that people describe receiving something from someone who is no longer alive. The tape arrived at his home after her passing. He said this quietly, with the specific care of someone handling something fragile. Her taped greeting arrived at his home after her passing. Here is what this story tells us about both of them. John Lennon talked about it. He did not have to. The information was private, a personal birthday message received under circumstances that nobody needed to know about. He could have let it remain private, let it be something only he and Yoko knew. He told Dick Cavett. He told it carefully. He let the world know that Janis Joplin, in the last days of her life, had thought of someone else's birthday and done something about it. And what does it tell us about Janis? It tells us what we have been discovering across 52 previous videos on this channel. The stage version was real, the feather boa was real, the banshee wail was real, and underneath all of it, also real, a person who paid her friend Nick's rent without telling him, who played a free concert in a park for 300 people in the rain, who stood between her audience and a police officer's bullhorn, who wrote to her mother every week, who walked a dog named George through the summer of love, who recorded a birthday greeting for someone she had never met, mailed it, and then was gone before he heard it. That was Janis Joplin, not just the voice, the person. Happy Birthday, John, Happy Trails was released in 1993 on the 4-disc Janis box set. It runs 1 minute and 15 seconds. It is the last recording Janis Joplin ever made for another person. You can hear it today on streaming services. It is there. 1 minute and 15 seconds of Janis Joplin singing a cowboy song for someone she had never met on October 1, 1970, 3 days before she died. Her voice is completely at ease, warm. The performance version of herself entirely absent, just a person in a studio singing a birthday song. Happy trails to you, until we meet again. She meant it as a birthday wish. It became something else. John Lennon died on December 8, 1980. He was 40 years old. He was shot outside his apartment building in New York City. He had been carrying the memory of that tape for 10 years. Janis Joplin's voice, singing Happy Trails, arriving in the mail after she was gone. 10 years later, he was gone too. The tape remains. The recording remains. Anyone can hear it today. Here is what this story asks you. When did you last do something kind for someone? Not because it would matter to your career or your reputation, but simply because you thought of them and acted on it. Janis Joplin was in the middle of finishing what would become one of the greatest albums in rock history. She was 27 years old. The tour was being planned. Everything was ahead. She thought of John Lennon's birthday. She stepped to a microphone. She sang Happy Trails. She mailed it. She was gone 3 days later. He received it. He carried it. He told Dick Cavett he remembered it for 10 years. 1 minute and 15 seconds. A cowboy song. A birthday card in the form of a tape. The last gift she ever gave. And the most heartbreaking farewell she never meant to leave. Subscribe. The next story goes somewhere nobody has taken you before.